Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. Appreciate you being here. We are going to improve your life path by giving you insight on the difference between a life coach and a therapist. Both can be very beneficial. Sometimes I think there's confusion between the two and the roles that they play. Not to say that you can't have both. Maybe you should. Depends on you. And she is a life coach and an amazing one at that with Purposeful Pathways, lifecoaching.com. Allison Cowan is back with us on the program. Allison, welcome. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Steve. It's always so good to see you.
You too. You too. And we talked about a lot along the way. And I believe we skimmed this topic at the very beginning of our talks. But I truly feel that we should give more depth on it because a lot of people think they're the same, don't see the difference between the two. I totally see it, having had a therapist and a life coach, and see the the difference it makes in your life. But again, not to say that there's not a place for therapy as well. So why don't we start with that? The difference between a therapist and a life coach.
So a therapist is somebody who is going to dig deeper into someone's past. They're more working with people who are not quite functional to bring them to a functional state. And they diagnose, they can work with psychiatrists who can then prescribe medications, so on and so forth. A life coach cannot diagnose. We may have something in the back of our minds, but we cannot diagnose. Mm-hmm. And we also assume that the person is whole and ready to move forward. So it's not always about digging deep into the past and not always about listening to all of the story. The story reveals itself over time with the right coaching questions. So it's, you go into talk therapy and you talk for an hour, and, there are different therapists who work differently. So, that all depends. Then there are some tools that we both use, like both professions use. They're just used a little differently. And as a coach, I'm not the expert. The client is the expert. I just have to know which questions to ask so that they move forward. So it's more of a forward moving process, getting somebody from point A to point B to point C, the results that they want.
Interesting thought, Allison, about the expert, because let's say you're working with Jimmy. Jimmy has a plumbing company. He wants to excel in that plumbing company and also, his relationships in general. Do you know about plumbing? Probably you don't run that deep in that territory, nor do I, nor do we choose to. But you're going to see things that he's not seeing from a coaching standpoint. You don't need to know about the plumbing aspect of it. He's the expert at that. But everything else surrounding it, and why he's stuck. He can't figure it out, why he hasn't moved forward in his business, but you can see it because you look at it from a different angle. And again, you don't have to know plumbing. It could be a heart surgeon.
Yes.
What do we know about that? But don't need to, because we're not talking about the trade or going deep in that territory. It's what's surrounding it that is not moving forward. And and I totally see it with a therapist. They go back into your past, uncover stuff, help you understand things. And there's definitely a benefit for that. There's no doubt about that. However, when that's done, um, it keeps coming up. It's a reoccurring thing and I've had, therapists before, and it's like you spend 20 minutes in the session talking about previous stuff instead of moving forward. And I think that's where a life coach is very beneficial. Just it's always moving forward.
Yeah. And again, I am pro therapy. If I were working with a client and things kept showing up, it's my ethical duty to recommend that they seek therapy, because this is not what I am able to do. Now, a therapist and a coach can work in tandem. I've had clients that a therapist has said, I'd like you to go find a life coach. And then you can also then have, with permission from the client, like, it's important that the coach and the therapist are on the same page. We don't want to be like saying opposite things that will confuse the client. So, with the client's permission, we're able then, the coach and the therapist are able to communicate to make sure we are on the same page, so to speak, so that, we're not incongruent. We're keeping that client, we have the same, moving them forward. They may be working on it a little differently. I may be working on it a little bit differently, and that's okay.
And that's not to say that as a life coach, you're not going to uncover things from somebody's past that is challenging. There's reasons for everything.
And it comes up.
Sure.
And sometimes I do believe it needs to come up. It's how long do we spend on it? If it's going to be weeks and weeks and weeks of dealing with something that happened in the past, then a therapist may be more appropriate.
Or if you're coaching someone and you realize that they're not making progress and moving forward, it potentially could be that situation where it was something from their past that's holding them back, limiting belief, whatever it might be. And you may have uncovered it, but you're not a therapist. So they may need additional help to work through that so that you can help them move forward.
And we do share a lot of similar techniques. It's just how they're used. So going into limiting beliefs and where they came from is perfectly acceptable in coaching. And, where did this come? Where do you think this came from? This thought came from? How is it affecting you? What would it be like if you no longer had this belief? What would be a new belief you'd like to adopt? So it's not that we don't look at it, but it's just like within that session, you're moving it forward.
Hmm. It's interesting we talk about this because I had a therapist from way back in the day and reconnected with him a few years ago. And I found I had to move on because he just kept marinating the old stuff and didn't focus on the moving forward. And I just honestly I got frustrated. I felt stuck. I felt stuck. And it wasn't me being stuck. It was him stuck in the past or just bringing up things that surround the situation instead of insightful things to move it forward. Um, and that's, relationships change too. So my relationship there, I guess it changed.
And I have had, I will admit, I kind of come and go with therapy. I've used the same counselor for over 12 years.
Mm-hmm.
And it's become more like an educator and mentor. You know, he's become more like an educator and a mentor for me.
Okay.
And I love when we're together because I learn something.
Hmm.
And he's actually an educator. He's taught at one of the best colleges in Cleveland area. And so he's a natural teacher.
Oh,
And so his teaching is therapeutic.
okay. You know what? It sounds like you get something strong out of it. And that's what it needs to be. If you're going to show up, they should show up and give you some value where you took something away. Even, not doesn't mean every session is going to be a slam dunk, but even if you walk away with a little nugget of information or insight, it's like, oh yeah, I didn't think of that. Wow, that's pretty good.
Yeah. And yet the sessions are very different than when I'm being coached.
Hmm.
They're very different. And so there's no right or wrong. And I think, just wanting to take away that stigma, because I think there still is a stigma with therapy. Even though I don't know how many people are in therapy, but people may not want to share it. It's, I don't want to tell anybody. I'm embarrassed. And then there are also jobs that if you are in therapy, you can lose jobs where you have clearance, government clearance.
Really? Wasn't aware of that. Yeah. Okay. Let me make sure.
Not a good thing to be in therapy.
I wasn't even aware of that.
They would
Sounds.
choose a life coach because it looks they can lose their government clearance if they are in therapy.
I'm kind of blown away by hearing that. So how does that go? Is it because you may, to your therapist, expose certain security risks, or is it just you're viewed as having challenges? Hey, we all have them. It's almost discriminatory.
I'm really not 100% sure. And that could be something I can look further into.
Yeah, just curious. It's
And I've had a few people that I've worked with and, very, very cautious about
hmm.
therapy and counseling because of losing for example, government clearance. That's one. So there's still a stigma.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know exactly why. So, please don't, take this as like the be all end all of truth.
But you what you just did was bring up an interesting point. Some people are not comfortable even saying to themselves, I'm seeing a therapist. Fortunately, nowadays it's a lot more common,
Mhm.
but some people are still, especially guys, to admit, yeah, I have a therapist. But it's easier for somebody to say, I have a life coach. They might feel more comfortable with that. And even just the whole concept of that. So, based on what you just said about the security clearance, that just inspired that thought in me that, it's easier to say I have a life coach, or if you don't feel comfortable even going to a therapist, a life coach is different.
And you don't have to share with anybody
Right.
that you're seeing a life coach. Um, it doesn't go through insurance. So, people,
Mhm.
it's not going through your insurance. Um, and, there's the strictest of confidentiality, just like with a counselor or a therapist or a psychologist. Um, Confidentiality is key. Um, Everything, you know, I'm so password protected that um so that when I have my notes, they're not
Yep.
they're not there, they're not accessible, people can't see them, people can't find them. So in a sense, it's like similar to HIPAA. And yeah, so the confidentiality is the same. And if somebody called me to ask, I without the person's permission, mm-mm.
Yep. And again, to your point, you don't have to give up very personal information if you don't feel it to have a life coach. It can get done without that. Um, it's in a different modality here. I had a timeline therapy done
Mm-hmm.
with a hypnotherapist. It was about maybe a month ago, and I never revealed anything. Didn't need to in that modality. I was actually blown away that I didn't. And she was taking me back to certain um, times of emotions that showed up. And you think of the first time you felt this particular emotion, and she didn't even need to know what it was. Never even said anything. She said, just said, "Is that the first time you think you felt that?" And I was a kid, thinking back as being a kid. I'm like, "Yeah, I think so." Well, okay, if you're not sure, let's look at it from looking down, visualize looking down on it, and then
Mm-hmm.
all different camera angles, if you will. But I never have said anything about the situations or anything. And that was hypnotherapy. So it's kind of
No,
amazing that it can get done
no, it
without
is.
sharing stuff.
And the story reveals itself.
Hmm.
And um, where a therapist may want more of the story,
Right.
I I will admit I battled this for quite a long time, because when I was an educator, a child's story and their background information made a big difference on my approach.
I get it.
And I have learned that the story just starts to unfold on its own.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I have
and
a friend who's an attorney, and he said to me once, and then I thought about it, and then as life goes on, and this is some years ago, everything will be revealed. Everything will be revealed. And I'm not saying that in a bad way, but to your point, let's say you have little Tanya. and Tanya's having some challenges learn. I'm going back to your educational background. Maybe Tanya's parents are getting divorced and there's a lot of turmoil in Tanya's life, but you're not outwardly going to say, even to the parents, what's the story? What's going on here? Tanya may give up at some point. Yeah, my dad doesn't live with me, blah, 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 whatever. It gets revealed in little nuggets, and you can say, oh, okay, all right. Well, she might be going through some challenges. Maybe we have to be mindful of that in terms of teaching her. And it might be the same way in terms of life coaching that, somebody might give you a little clue, nothing wrong with that. And it's like, oh, okay. Maybe somebody has a feeling that they can't make money, they can't prosper. And they might drop a hint to you that, their mom was a single mom growing up and times were tight. Okay, well, now it's been planted in their head from back in the day that maybe they have a blockage, a limiting belief that they can't make money or be prosperous. And it's not like you're going to call them out on it. It's just going to be in your mind. Oh, okay, all right, well, duly noted.
We're going to look at their big vision.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked about lenses, and that is a coaching skill where you're zooming in and zooming out. Mm-hmm. So you're zooming out to see the bigger picture and then zooming in to then address the smaller pieces of that big picture.
Sure.
The big picture is the vision, and that's really what we need to just, what is your vision? Where do you want to be? What are we going to do to get there? And I know I'm simplifying things, but it's not always that easy. But it's so amazing when you see people and experience and witness breakthroughs, transformations, and the growth and being able to celebrate.
Yeah. And that feeling of the aha moment, like, oh, I never thought about that. Wow.
And sometimes it's the craziest thing, because I'll ask a question that to me is like, well, it's just a question. And the other, the person will say, wow, what a great question. And so, sometimes they land, sometimes they flop, and you just try again, ask another one.
Well, I think you are continuously on a fact-finding mission to learn more about somebody, what their goals are, and even as it progresses down the way, learning even more. There might be other pieces that pop up. Life is always moving. So let's say somebody moves from point A to point G. There's going to be things that are going on in between there that got them there. And maybe there's some challenges along the way. So I think you're forever just listening, learning, and then maybe helping them reset the course, because sometimes they may veer off course on their way to their goal, whatever it might be. But it's got to be for you so gratifying when somebody hits that aha moment, when they have that realization based on you coaching them and working with them. But wow, I'm glad that happened, right?
It is. And oftentimes, at the end of a session, actually always at the end of a session, I ask for takeaways. At least one, possibly three. And when a client will say, well, it's because of you, blah, 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 I'm like, okay, no, I appreciate that. Thank you so much for your kind words. However, you have done the work. This is your takeaway. Thank you for appreciating me. Yet I didn't do the work. You did.
Yeah. You drove, they were driving the car. You just told them, you're the GPS.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
Talking about ending the session, we're out of time.
We're always out of time.
We've done that again. The website, your website is purposefulpathwayslifecoaching.com. You offer a free consult to set the GPS, I guess we could say, set the destination and see if it's a right fit for somebody to take the road that you want to lead them down.
Any questions, just there's a contact me where you don't necessarily have to schedule a session, but if you have questions,
sure,
contact me. Send me the questions.
Yeah. The majority of us have never had a life coach, so therefore there has to be questions. The process, how it works, feeling out the relationship too at the same time. But Allison, always great having you on, and I'm glad we did a deeper dive into the comparison between therapists and life coaches. So I think it's even more clear for all of us.
I hope so. I hope so. And any questions, please feel free to reach out. I love it. And so
thanks again for being here. And
I can't wait till next week. What are we gonna do?
I know, that's on you. That's your job. Purpose, you're the GPS. I'm just driving.
I know, but we do a good job together and figuring it out. And thank you so much, Steve. And I don't want us to get in any more trouble.
Yep, we got it. I'm getting the signal. Purposefulpathwayslifecoaching.com. Thanks, Allison. We'll talk soon, okay?
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house.
And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned.
This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.